Thank you so much for joining us, and thanks a lot for agreeing to come to Brussels Forum, sir.
I was here anyway, so.
Still, you're already one of the most accessible members of this administration.
Thank you.
And you've been here since early April, right?
April 2nd.
I saw the video that your team put on Facebook to the Avengers music as you're walking into the office. Yeah. It was very menacing.
Yeah, that was one of the great things that I realized when I arrived here. I mean, it was to get through Senate confirmation. That's singular focus on that. Then you get confirmed, and literally I got confirmed, and I was on the plane with Secretary Rubio that night. Arriving in Brussels with, a carry-on bag essentially to take this job as the permanent representative to NATO for the United States, and I really lucked into just a top-notch team at the U.S. mission, and just on all fronts, whether it's the social media team, whether it's the political team, or whether it's the military team. It was extraordinary, and so it was. I was very lucky, and they, obviously they don't have much to work with, so they make me look good.
Well, I'm sure that's not that hard. So you walk into Brussels and into this top job representing the Trump administration at a time where President Trump had sort of flipped the transatlantic alliance with his backing away from saying that Russia is the aggressor in the Ukraine war. Everybody is freaked out. How freaked out have they been?
You didn't mention Pete Hegseth in February.
I'm not even going to get into Pete Hegseth, but just what was the response? How much of your time are you spending doing reassuring and trying to calm people down?
I think Secretary General Ruta says it best. How many more members of the United States government need to say that the United States is a part of NATO to stay, and we're not going anywhere? We just need the Europeans to step up, to equalize, and to be a great partner in the transatlantic alliance. And so, obviously there's some reassurance. It happens just because the United States is the world's only superpower. And at the same time, as the world's only superpower
right
now, I know we are engaging in probably a centuries-long strategic competition with China, and that's going to take resources, and that's why we're making sure that this alliance is strong, that it's built for not only the current threats but future threats. But what I always say and what I tell our allies is, we need allies. The United States cannot go alone into this very dangerous world, ever increasingly dangerous, and so we need our allies. But we need allies that are capable, that are strong as well, and that can join the fight if a fight breaks out. Now, the nice thing, and I think instead of reassurance that we need to remind our adversaries, is that NATO is a defensive alliance. We are not built for offensive, and we have no consideration of offensive capabilities. We are solely to defend every single inch of the alliance, and to make sure that through that deterrence and through that strength of all allies, that we can then deter and have the peace for another century here on the continent.
But I think everybody listening to you right now, you mentioned the sort of seminal threat from China, and China is a big adversary. But this is Europe.
Yep.
They care about Russia here.
They do.
You
they
haven't
should.
mentioned Russia as an adversary, and this administration has sort of veered a little bit away from that.
Yeah, I've been unafraid.
How are you navigating that when you're here, and that's the big threat?
Well, I agree. For the Euro-Atlantic Alliance, the biggest threat, the biggest challenge is Russia. There's no doubt about that. They invaded Ukraine. I'm not afraid to say that. And so if you're on the eastern flank, if you're in the Baltics, or if you're Estonia, or if you're Finland, quite frankly, that has almost 1,000-mile border with Russia, that is looking you right every day, right in the face, and you understand that threat that Russia poses, especially since they invaded Ukraine and what they did in Georgia, and there's several acts of aggression that they have promulgated. So, but at the same time, that's the Euro-Atlantic, and what we need to encourage people is to we'll address that We're going to all get stronger. We're, through this new Hague defense commitment that we expect in less than 2 weeks now. Good Lord willing. It's great being a part of a consensus organization. Let me tell you that. Consensus means everybody, right?
Yeah.
It's a little bit like a marriage. But in all seriousness, we are encouraging our NATO allies to work with us to address, the Euro-Atlantic threats, but also the global threats. And that's why we have Indo-Pacific partners. That's why we have an alliance that I think is dynamic, that is agile, and that can adjust. And that's, I'm always heartened when I came here and I realized that a lot of the spade work and raising the concerns about China, how they, what they do to economies, what they do with their Belt and Road Initiative, all of those issues had been sold, by the previous Trump administration and even by the Biden administration, who carried on that work here in Europe and at NATO. And so, I think there's, the ground is pretty fertile to understand that Russia is the near threat, but China is obviously a big challenge for all of us, and we need to be allied again, and address those threats as well.
So moving on to the Hague summit then. I went into journalism because I sucked at math, so please excuse my bad...
Same reason I went into law.
Yeah, please excuse my bad math, but this 5% GDP for defense spending goal, which is the big deliverable that we're looking at for the NATO summit, a lot of this feels to me like smoke and mirrors, because it's not really 5%, it's 3.5%.
That's absolutely not true. It is 5%. And one of the things...
But that's like you're calling defense spending, building a road or something.
If you can't get tanks from Spain and Germany to the eastern flank to address, a security challenge because the bridges can't handle the weight, that is defense spending. Let's all agree, if a World War III breaks out on the European continent, what's the first shot? Is it going to be Russian tanks invading Poland, or is it going to be a cyber attack on one of our allies, or a challenge on some infrastructure, or taking out something like that? That's why we have to take a broader. Nobody said 5% on NATO defense capability targets. I mean, it was always, we need to spend 5% on defense. And defense, I think everybody would agree. In fact, General Cavoli has recently said this to all of our allies, that we need this broader spending because the enablement, the roads and bridges, the train tracks, all of these things aid in the fight. And so they are defense related. And it's not a grab bag. I said this in Estonia a couple of weeks ago. This 5%, and especially the 1.5% on defense related spending, is not a grab bag that everybody can put all of their, sort of spending into. This is stuff that helps the hardcore defense capabilities actually get to the fight and sustain the fight and make sure that our infrastructure is hardened and all the types of things that we need to invest in as well.
So in the negotiations leading up to this then, are you putting, where are we on a date, a target for when they would have to do this? Are you going to put anything in there about making sure people don't, or do you care whether people backload it like they did the 2%, where everybody's finally getting there? It took quite some time to get there. And
yeah, we have to, and we cannot have another Wales pledge. Obviously, the hockey stick that has happened, and where we just have countries announcing this year, 11 years since the Wales pledge, to reach the 2%. We just can't have that. And so there are, we're in the middle of negotiating this statement. In fact, we had a very constructive meeting this morning where we talked about these topics with all the allies. We have to have incremental progress, and the reason it's not anything like the Wales pledge is because you already see folks investing now. Since President Trump was elected in 2017, you've seen almost $1 trillion spent, and you've seen a lot of money spent, especially since Russia invaded in 2022 Ukraine, and really in the last year, you've seen dramatic and increased defense spending, and that needs to be sustained. Now, we need to prevent inflation. If we have all this money pouring in to limited availability, capabilities, there's a real risk that we get, less bang for our buck because of inflation, and so we need to make sure that it's incremental, that it's measured, but it's sustained. And so all of these pieces and parts, are being negotiated. The Secretary General Rutte said it over the weekend, I think, in London at Chatham House. He said that all the intelligence suggests that the Russian military could reconstitute in 5 years or less. And to your point, our European allies are telling us that Russia is the biggest threat to the alliance, and so that's what's driving this timeline. But obviously, budgets drive this timeline as well. Political realities drive this timeline as well.
But on that point, then, at the same time that we're acknowledging that Russia could reconstitute in 5 years, and Rutte did say this at Chatham House. The Trump administration,
which is weird to see a public Chatham House, by the way.
I didn't understand that either, to tell you the truth. And I can't believe I sound like such a nerd going around saying things like Chatham House. But anyway,
trust me, I'm from Des Moines, Iowa.
This is all coming at a time you're acknowledging that Russia is going to reconstitute in 5 years and prove a huge threat to NATO, but the U.S. is talking about drawing down its troop presence in Europe.
Not true.
That's
not true. That is not what the United States is saying. We're saying that we always do a defense posture review, and that we are working with our European allies to make sure that there's no security gaps, that there's no surprises, and that if we do have to move capabilities because of the forced posture of the United States of America, that we'll work with our European allies to make sure that they can backfill that and make the alliance even stronger. And so. I don't think it is a foregone conclusion that the troops in the United States troops in Europe is necessarily going to change, but this is something we're always going to look at as to how we're deployed and base it on our threats. Every country does that. Great Britain just went through a similar process and decided they needed to spend a lot more money on their defense. So I'm sorry to push back, but I just
I'm
think
glad
that
you are.
I don't like that.
Actually I'm sure people here are relieved to hear you say that. And then a draft, continuing on the NATO summit, Bloomberg's already seen a draft of this, which they had a story this morning. It's one page only at this point. It's devoid of a lot of things, including any mention of Ukraine's eventual accession or path to NATO. Is that something that's been pushed by the Trump administration to strip all of that out?
I mean, we're in the middle of negotiations. I'm not sure that, to the extent that Bloomberg, does have a previous draft of the statement, I'm sure after today and the discussions have been going on, it's different. Mm-hmm. Because again, we're a consensus organization, and so all 32 allies have to agree on this statement.
But what would the United States be comfortable with NATO saying about eventual Ukraine accession at this summit?
I don't know if we will say. I mean, I'm not certain that's in, or I don't. Again,
because 2 years it was in the summit last time.
I understand. And I also think that that on the Ukraine topic, to some extent, we need to make sure with the ongoing peace discussions that are, or ceasefire discussions that are ongoing, that we provide enough space for the president and his team to negotiate whatever resolution of that is. So I don't know what the final statement will contain regarding Ukraine and joining NATO or not. I think there are probably some allies right now that would not support that. But again, that's another thing that has to have all 32 allies. What I've been clear about is that I don't think Russia should have a voice in that. I don't think they should have a veto power. I think that should be up to the 32 allies to decide whether or not. But what I do know is that Ukraine is probably, for the near term and the long term, is going to be a significant defense capabilities manufacturer for the alliance, because
we're learning so much from them. I mean,
the innovation is incredible.
This is a classroom, a
classroom on how to kill people, but yes, it's.
But it's a classroom on how to wage war in this. Right. What about the role of Zelensky at the summit? Is he going to meet? Were you guys talking about him meeting with Trump? And if so, are you going to keep JD Vance away?
Well, I mean, JD's a friend of mine. I don't think he's expected to attend the summit. But at the same time, I think it's been reported that Zelensky's going to be there in some capacity, and I think that we're all just making sure. Again, this is all 32 allies have to agree as to how that participation and what it looks like. But I mean, I know he's going to be at the G7 is what I understand, and I think we'll all get we'll get enough Zelensky at both those events to satisfy I think what everybody needs and wants, which is I think there is no doubt right now that with a hot land war in Europe, that European security is on the top of mind of all of us, and making sure that we get this right, making sure that the NATO alliance is strong, that it's capable, and that it's quite frankly lethal. Is again the number one priority, and so when you talk about, I want to go back to the statement. One of the things that I've been trying to argue for is I think if we're talking about sort of a factory reset of NATO, of getting NATO back to being a defense and a deterrence alliance, that should be simple. That's blocking and tackling. As an old college football player, American football, sorry. As blocking and tackling, the basics, and we're trying to get back to the basics of this alliance, which is the blocking and tackling of the alliance, which is defense and deterrence.
We've got 3.5 minutes left,
Really?
so let's do a lightning.
We can go much longer if you want.
Yeah, they won't like that. Let's do a lightning round.
Okay.
Military aid to Ukraine. All of the PDA, most of the PDA that the Biden administration put in place before President Trump came into office is going to be expiring by the end of the summer.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on whether Trump should be going back to, whether the United States, whether the president should be going back to Congress on more military aid, particularly air defenses, because that's something that Ukraine really needs that the United States can provide?
Yeah, I just don't. I don't know. I mean, I think that it's going to ultimately be up to the Congress. If the.
But not if the president doesn't.
With this slim of margins, I mean, I watched this, very carefully, and how few votes they have in the House, and how hard it was to pass the big beautiful bill, and how it's
80 senators right now are backing Lindsey Graham's bill.
That's on sanctions. That is not on aid.
It's not on
so
aid
yeah,
to
those
Ukraine,
are two different
but
things.
those are the same people that would most likely. I think and it does require. There is such a thing as presidential leadership. It is going to require.
There is, but I mean, he can't do it alone. I mean, this is to some extent. It's. I think they're going to have to. We're going to have to see where we are, how kind of peace negotiations are going, and I think that's all just going to be trying to predict the future, and that's one of the things I've learned through my 3 times through the federal government now is that it's very hard to predict the future, and so I just don't know where that's going to land when it comes up. I guess it's coming up in August. I think that's when the last one was passed anyway. And I just don't know. And again, that's a political question that's ultimately up to the Congress to pass.
But you present your advice to the president
Sure.
on this matter, and this is something that you have to be hearing every single day as you go on about your work as the U.S. ambassador to NATO. So where do you stand on this?
Well, I mean, nobody cares where Matt Whitaker stands on this, to be honest with you. What I would tell the president is if we truly believe that we expect Europe to take over the conventional defense of the European continent, then they should certainly take over, the lion's share of, providing aid to Ukraine and their fight.
But Europe has stepped up and is continuing to step up there. But on air defenses, which Ukraine is, I mean, when you look at what happened, Russia has just retaliated with a huge, another big drone attack. I mean, that's something that's definitely that's a need in the here and now.
Yeah, and these are ongoing conversations. What the United States can provide and who pays for it are sometimes two different questions. So I think we're going to continue to have those important discussions. The United States will continue to be a good ally and a good partner, and we're just going to have to kind of each one of these tactical decisions are going to have to be made when they're ready to be made.
So in my 15 seconds, I have one last question.
Yeah.
What did you think of the Ukrainian drone attack on Russia's strategic warplanes a couple of weeks ago. All these guys at the Pentagon were pretty much cheering quietly. And even President Trump, we hear, said to aides that he thought it was, quote, badass. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think on the one hand, I think it was creative. Obviously, the way it was planned and executed was impressive. I think at the same time, when you're going after a country's nuclear, capabilities and potentially one of their, survivable, their keys to survivability and deterrence, that's always dangerous. And you sometimes never know how that's going to turn out. And so, I think on the one hand, it was badass. On the other hand, I think it was also, a little bit reckless and a little bit dangerous. And that's what makes me nervous. But at the same time,
But they have been under attack by
they've
Russia.
been under a 3-year war where they were invaded. And so I think you should expect they're going to do things like this for their survivability. And so, this is why we have to end this war. It boils down to very simply that the killing must stop, the slaughter must stop. The needless loss of life that's happening on the battlefield on both sides, and the civilians that are also being killed and injured. It has to end. And I think we need to do everything we can to create the environment that leads to that ceasefire and ultimately a lasting peace.
And we have to end. I'm being yelled at now by that screen back there.
It's flashing. That's not good.
Ambassador Whitaker, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank
We're really
you.
happy to have you.
Enjoyed it. Thank you.